All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cut to the Chase Bengals Blitz. I'm your host, Chase Younts. If you guys are listening to us, obviously make sure you favorite this podcast. If you get it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google wherever you get it. There's so many places to get podcasts. It's a big thing. If you're watching us on YouTube, we appreciate it. Like the video, subscribe, comment, do whatever you can with it. If you're also watching it on YouTube, and if you're listening as well, you'll see a guy to my right who sounds almost alike because, he's my dad. You got Chad Younts Sr. in the house, my dad. What's going on, Dad?
Hey, I'm just finishing up a day of work and getting me a workout in. Excited to get on this podcast and talk about my team, Bengals.
Got that right. I mean, that's obviously something that we share in common. We, share pretty deeply. Obviously, if people are listening to us, you'll be, somewhat getting the same kind of flow like my grandma and grandpa get when it comes to, listening to us on phone calls and everything, because you're not going to be really able to tell the difference in who's talking in this one because we've gotten that a lot. Isn't that right?
It's like Chris Collinsworth and his son.
Honestly, though, it's pretty wild, how that is and stuff. I mean, they're the same. Physically they're the same build, but then obviously you look at the, hear the voice. It's like, whew, I mean, I can't even tell who's apart. I mean, imagine those two calling the same game together. You won't even be able to tell the difference on that.
Hard to tell the difference.
Yeah. Got that right. But yeah, I'm not going to waste any time into this. Obviously, me and my dad watch almost every single Bengals game together when possible. We've been doing this for such a long time. He's actually been on the podcast before, which is a couple years back. We did a couple shows last year. We did a Steelers game preview and a Dallas Cowboys game preview. We went 0-2. We were like, we should probably hold off on the next week's episode. And what happened to that? The Bengals won 14 of the next 17 games. Obviously, had nothing to do with it, but just had to throw that out there. But I was back home this weekend. The bye week was in effect for the Cincinnati Bengals. Obviously needed some help from a lot of the blue teams in the National Football League, the Colts, the Lions, the Rams, and the result of that had us Bengals fans feel pretty blue when it came to the results. Nothing happened. This was the worst. This was the worst bye week I think I've ever seen when it comes to other teams in our division's results. You had the Cleveland Browns. Honestly, we're going to talk about officiating later on the show. Let's talk about officiating now, actually. I mean, we obviously had a heated discussion about this. We were all on the same side. I mean, obviously, my older brother, Chad Younts Jr. was over at our house, too, and we were having this whole thing going on. The Browns, I mean, don't get me wrong. They scored 39 points. They played a very good game. Their defense was really good. But, I mean, they got bailed out at the end. What were your thoughts on that? Obviously, you've had a couple of days to relax.
Well, I got a lot of friends that are Browns fans, and they made some valid points. They've really been the recipient of some terrible calls. If you think about 3 or 4 years ago in the AFC Championship game on the
divisional round. Yeah, they played the Chiefs. Those are the Chiefs. So yeah.
So they've had their fair share of bad calls, and I'm not a Browns hater, but that was the end of that game was pretty bad. That was pretty rough. If I'm a Colts fan, I'm pretty hot.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, obviously, each team has probably been on the bad side of things, the good side team. Some teams have been on the good side of things more times than not, to say the least. But I mean, obviously, I think a lot more people are upset about it because the Browns have been on the good, that side of things twice in the last 2 weeks. I mean, against the Niners, they got away with a couple of things. But, in the end, a win's a win in the National Football League, and that's really the only thing that matters at the end of the day. The Browns, a good football team. Obviously, they, handed it to us week 1. Hopefully, we'll see them week 18 with some big stakes coming on. Looking at the Ravens, they took down
the Browns are the top 2 defense.
They're a very, very, very good defense.
Top 3 defense.
Yeah, they're really, really good. They just got to see what's going on with offense and everything. As fans, hopefully they don't figure it out, but they're a pretty good football team. The Ravens, they unfortunately took down the Lions. That's our second favorite team, the Detroit Lions. My brother, that's his favorite team. They got absolutely whooped on Sunday.
Man, they dismantled them.
They definitely did. When we played the Ravens week 2, that I think out of the 3 losses, that one hurt the most because, it was a game where we played, very, very poorly, but we only lost by 3 points, and there were a lot of opportunities in that game.
I completely forgot we almost lost by 3 because it felt like we lost by a lot more because of how bad Joe Burrow played. Like, just overall, it felt like a worse loss than just a 3-point loss.
It definitely did. I mean, obviously, we were playing from behind the entire game, and that's nothing, you don't ever want to do that in the National Football League, try to play from behind all the time. And, really frustrating to see that. I mean, the Ravens just dominated the Lions in every facet. They run the football really well. Lamar Jackson, threw for 350-plus yards, something that he hasn't done in over a year or so. Mm-hmm. That was the first game that he threw for over 255 yards in 17 games. So that was a big time outing for him. The Ravens might be getting ready to click on offense, and we'll see them in like 3 weeks. So obviously the Bengals, hopefully they get some wins under their belt and they get ready for a big game against them in mid-November. The Steelers, I'll say this. The Rams had a lead against the Steelers. The Steelers got better in the second half, and they obviously scored touchdowns. And, obviously we didn't know if the Rams were going to be able to go back down the field and score on the Steelers who halted them in the second half. But, come on. At the fourth down when Kenny Pickett sneaks it, they came out and measured the spot and everything. But come on, you got to have better eyes than that to see that he was short of the first down marker. That's just absurd.
He was clearly short. Now, obviously, I'm biased because I don't like the Steelers, but I always like to take my bias hat off and say, okay, if this was my team, is it legit the right call, not the right call? That was terrible. I don't even know how they even spotted it that bad. I was watching a replay today off college, and I can't remember who it was, and the quarterback he did a slide where he was giving himself up. He was 1 yard past the first down, and they marked it a half yard before. It wasn't that bad, but I was just thinking, like, I just wonder what some of these refs are honestly looking at when they got 4K TV. We got 4K cameras in there, and you got a guy in a booth, and you still get it wrong. That it's unbelievable.
That's the big thing, and it's like, obviously in real time in the human element, it's like, okay, it's obviously tougher than it looks. Don't get me wrong. Officiating is, pretty tough, but the big thing about it is you've seen some officials when they've made a call, maybe it's that a guy got both feet down, and then they would quickly go back and look at the monitor, and then they would overturn the call. It wouldn't even be a challenge. They just would be able to just make that quick call, so no one has to use a challenge or any sort of thing like that. But in that circumstance, you would have thought with how badly short Kenny Pickett was in that situation that it would have been one of those circumstances. But it just, and it was a really, I think when we were watching that, we were watching it live. I remember you guys were like, that's terrible, blah, 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 which it was. But I remember when they had the spot, and I was sitting back, I was like, all right, they're gonna challenge it. It's all good. It's outside of 2 minutes. But then I forgot about the rule where it said, oh yeah, Sean McVay can't challenge this because he has no timeouts left. And we all lost it because it's like, that's just an absolute travesty. But nonetheless, the division's doing really well. This is the best division in football. Obviously, this is a Bengals show, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But let's talk about their opponent, the San Francisco 49ers. They started off 5-0. They lost to the Cleveland Browns last week. They lost to the 49ers on Monday night. They're the 49ers, my fault. They lost to the Minnesota Vikings on Monday Night Football, 22-17. Very odd game to watch. Brock Purdy playing from behind in both of those games. Something that the Niners, don't like to do with their system.
They miss Deebo Samuels. That'd be like us missing Jamar Chase, essentially, or, Ayuk, or whoever you want to. They missed Deebo big time. That hurt them bad. He really missed him. Purdy actually made a couple right reads. He just his timing was just off by a little bit on some of those throws, and you could just tell he didn't hit him in stride when he should have.
Yep.
That was Kirk Cousins did not do a typical Kirk Cousins primetime game. He did played actually. He did have the interception, but for him to bring them back right before halftime and get that touchdown, that was huge. And that play was literally a split second off of being an interception.
Oh yeah, there were a few of those plays like that. It was close, but in the NFL, it's a couple of different plays that can decide the outcome of a game, and it was definitely shown in that last night. Looking at a couple of the numbers down the list, the Niners are actually top 12 in every major offensive/defensive category in the National Football League, except for pass defense, which is something that the Bengals are obviously looking at. Christian McCaffrey's the league leader in rushing yards at 598 yards. He actually has the longest touchdown streak with a touchdown in the National Football League, 16 games in a row where he's found the end zone. So he's done a really good job when it comes to that. Brock Purdy.
And if you got him on your fantasy team too, he's putting up.
Oh, yeah.
Dude's straight putting up on your fantasy team. He's a stud this year. And the whole key with him is if he stays healthy. And the dude's just, man, he just putting up some straight fantasy points. And he produces, and he makes that offense go.
Got that right. I mean, obviously, he had a receiving touchdown last night, and he had a rushing touchdown. As you know, he was the only guy that scored for the Niners yesterday, which was big for them. Brock Purdy still at 107.2 passer rating this year, which is up in the top 3 in the National Football League, completing around 68% of his passes. The whole season for Brock Purdy has been pretty well for the most part. Just the last 2 games, I mean, he's had to play from behind, and obviously hasn't gone well. I'll talk about a stat in a second about that. Brandon Ayuk.
He leads the team. He leads the team in reception or receiving yards, like 511 yards, I think, going into the game. It was after the game. 511 yards, dude. The dude's balling out.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, Deebo Samuel's really their chess piece on offense, and they can move him around and everything. He's a big part of their offense. But Brandon Ayuk's the leading receiver on this team, averaging 85 yards a game. He's the best pure receiver on that football team, I'd say. Deebo Samuel's still very good, but Deebo Samuel, I mean, he has value in many different places compared to Brandon Ayuk being a great pass catcher and being the guy that's going to make some big plays for them. And
I have to agree with you on that.
Yeah, and then I mean, obviously George Kittle hasn't had the best season so far, but the Bengals have struggled with tight ends. So, obviously George Kittle's last time against the Bengals, he had like 12 catches in the 2021 matchup, and it was an absolute thriller, that game was. We were just on the wrong side of things. Fred Warner on defense has 60-plus tackles, 2 sacks, 2 interceptions. That dude is really, really good at the game of football, linebacker for the Niners. He flies around. Obviously, he got hurt last night. We'll see what his status is throughout the week, but, really, really good football player. And then Nick Bosa, the highest paid defensive player of all time in the National Football League, got off to a slow start. But obviously, have to keep an eye on him. He's obviously a top 3 or 4 pass rusher in the National Football League. But the stat I wanted to mention is under Kyle Shanahan, the Niners are 0-29 when trailing by 5+ points in the fourth quarter. They have not been able to come back. Very, very big stuff. Obviously, there were a few years where the Niners were not that good of a football team in 2017 and 2018 and even 2020 off the Super Bowl run that they had. But it just shows that, obviously they run a great system in San Francisco. But if you get ahead of the system and you disrupt the system, it's going to be hard for a team like that to come back in the snap of a finger. But do you have any other thoughts on the 49ers as a team before we move on to the Cincinnati Bengals?
Yeah, a couple things. I was watching Pat McAfee's show today, and Aaron Rodgers was on there, and he was talking about Nick Bosa, and when Nick Bosa's off the field, which is very rare, how they would try to hurry up and get a couple of different plays in that they could not put in because of that. And it was kind of interesting to hear him talk about, it's very rare that he's off the field, but if he's not in there, we can run things that we normally could not run because he's such a disruptor. He is, he's elite. He's up there with probably the top 5 in the league. I did have an interesting stat, though. So I was looking at trying to compare, and I'll wait till we get to the Bengals to compare some of the other stuff. But I did see the 49ers are averaging 6 yards a play and about 4.3 yards rushing, which is still pretty good. Purdy, 68% completion percentage. He was 11 touchdowns and 3 interceptions with 12 sacks. So when we start talking about the Bengals, it's kind of interesting to see what the numbers look like when we kind of get down to them, when you look at what they do. So, for instance, we're talking about the Bengals going into it. The Bengals are averaging 4.2 yards a play and 3.5 yards rushing, which we're gonna touch on. But I think that's one of the keys to our success is trying to establish that run. And right now we're not doing it. Nixon's not hateful. He's at 3.8. The team obviously the quarterback goes into this as well, but 3.5 yards rushing, just not going to get it. 49ers are averaging almost one more yard rush per rushing attempt. That's pretty big. That's pretty big over the course of a game.
Oh, 100%. I mean, obviously, if you're running the same amount of times, you run the ball 25 times a game, the Niners are averaging more than 100 yards a game rushing. The Bengals are averaging just under 80 yards, and that does play big dividends when it comes to short yardage and setting up third downs and everything. But we will talk about the Cincinnati Bengals in just a second. We're going to take a really, really short break. We'll be right back in just a second, but we'll talk about the Bengals on the other side. All right, and we are back on the Cut to the Chase Bengals Blitz. I'm your host, Chad Younts. My father, Chad Younts Sr, on the other line. If it sounds alike, it is what it is. You just got to deal with it. We're just bringing some points into this. We talked a little bit. My dad mentioned about the Bengals, before we went to break, about some of the yards per play and some of the stats that were going on, and the big thing being quarterback. Let me ask you this. Do you think Joe Burrow will be back to near 100% come Sunday? What do you think?
I think he's going to be back. My question is going to be the play calling. Are we going to put him in a situation to where he, the play calling is the correct play call for what we're probably going to see cover 2 again, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we'll see a lot of stuff. The Niners run a lot of zone and everything. So
and we just got to know that you got to dink and dunk on some of that stuff and just take what they give you. I think he will be. This year obviously his numbers are down. He played the first few games. I mean, hurt. He's still probably not 100%, but he's probably as close as we're probably going to see him, considering he's going to have to play through a lot of this. He's at 63% completion for the year, which is, didn't he lead the league last year in completion percentage?
Well, coming into the league season, he was the all-time leader in completion percentage in the National Football League. So this is not like Joe at all, obviously.
No, and his numbers are down. I mean, now the sacks are down, which is really good. But he's I think I had him at 7 touchdowns and 4 interceptions to Brock Purdy's 11 and 3. So they're not that far off, but he has 14 sacks to Purdy's 12. You saw the last couple games, his elusiveness. He's not super fast, but he, if you remember back in the day, Ben Roethlisberger, even just a few years ago, guy was just a hard guy to get down. He wasn't fast at all. Joe Burrow's more athletic than Ben Roethlisberger, but when he's right, he's really elusive. He's just not super fast, but he's hard to get down.
Yeah, I mean, just being able to extend plays. Obviously it's been the big thing over the last couple of years. I mean, no play is perfect. No pocket's going to ever be perfect, but just being able to extend plays for Joe Burrow. And we've seen the last 2 weeks, which has resulted in wins. Obviously Joe didn't play great in week 6. He played, very well in week 5. But we've seen Joe being able to extend plays, and he looked sharper on the first 2 drives of the Seahawks game. And he looked, very well in that Cardinals game. It was a lot of quick game stuff. It was a lot of progression. It was a lot of building things up. So, I mean, it's going to be a really big thing for Joe Burrow. I think, he'll be, like I said, close to back as he'll be. Obviously there's no excuse at this point with the calf. He's already played through 6 weeks. He's gotten us to 3-3 after all the stuff because, this year so far, us Bengals fans have felt really, really frustrated and agitated about the entire thing that's going on. And, at this point, there's no excuses whatsoever. And this team is getting healthier and healthier. And that's just going to be a big thing going forward. And hopefully we get, the full Joe Burrow back. When we're looking at the run attack, like said, Mixon averaging 3.8 yards per carry. Obviously would like to see a little more production from him, but we'd like to see a little more carries for him. That's going to be a big thing. Play calling has been the big thing. Obviously, Brian Callahan has shown up on a few shows, a lot of Bengals shows this week, talking about, some things that they want to fix and, some things that have gone well over the first 6 weeks. Obviously a lot more things that they want to fix, but they are a 3-3 football team. So obviously, the bye over the last couple of years has done some pretty good things for Cincinnati Bengals. If you look, obviously we've gotten on some big runs. We had week 10 buys at the time. We have a week 7 bye now going into week 8. So, it'll be interesting to see how things shift, but obviously we like to see a lot more Joe Mixon being able to have a threat in the run game and just to relieve some pressure off of Joe Burrow going forward.
I'm not a real big fan of the early buys. In this case, it probably because of his calf, probably worked out well. I like that week 10 to 14 bye just because you're getting later and later in the season when guys need more and more rest. But probably in this case, the week 7 tends to probably work in his favor. Just that extra week of rest is probably pretty big for him. One of the keys I was looking at on this too, it's been our Achilles heel this year, which has not been the case the last few years. Joe always finds a way to make a play, especially when we need a big third down conversion. We're 27 of 81 on third down. That's terrible.
Yep.
We're not even at, what's that, 30%?
It's 33% right there.
33%. That's a killer for us. And I think, with the rushing and the lack of no tight end production, you have no tight end production.
Yep.
I think for them, the lack of tight end production, the run game, that's just, and the third down conversion is probably some of the keys for us. Lucky for us, Orlando Brown's fine. I heard him on the radio today talking with somebody. He said his groin's fine. He's going to be okay. I guess he had strained a groin. I didn't realize he had done that.
Yep.
If we lost him, that would be big. The fact that Debo's out is kind of big for us, for the 49ers. They look a little bit not easy to beat, but just obviously taking away that major weapon for them has hurt Brock Purdy.
Yeah, I'd say so as well. I mean, and big thing is something that has not normally been a problem for us, this season. It's been really receiver production. I mean, Jamar Chase has been fantastic. He's had 2 huge games, to say the least. Yeah. But Tyler Boyd, only 204 yards receiving. T. Higgins has battled through injury, but he has not had a great year when he's been on the field. Obviously, a rib injury is nothing, to sell short. It was, it's a bad injury playing through broken ribs in a high contact sport. Joe Mixon, Trenton Irwin. I mean, Trenton Irwin stepped up in the Cardinals game. He was very big, having career high 8 receptions. Just you want to see more production from these guys if possible, but we got to have some type of complementary offense, and our quarterback's got to be better. He's got to be on point. And Joe Burrow, his production this year for quarterbacks in the National Football League, it's probably, like a C when it comes to quarterbacks around the league. Mm-hmm. But for Joe Burrow, this is almost a D- compared to what he normally is at. I mean, Joe Burrow's an A-level quarterback. He is, as people would mention, going through last year, arguably the second best quarterback in the National Football League. And his okay level, his bad level is actually, not bad. It's 3-3 in the National Football League. But if you see a different Joe Burrow come out, and we see the Joe Burrow that we know and love as a Bengals quarterback, and we see him come out and play close to elite or very elite going forward, then we'll be here talking in late January, early February, if that's the case. That's
what game was it we saw him step into that deep ball? It wasn't Arizona. Was it the game before?
It was Arizona. It was
Arizona.
Yep.
You kind of had an idea that it was back, because you could tell earlier on that he wasn't getting the step in. He was forcing some balls downfield, leaving them short, because he doesn't have elite arm strength. He didn't have Josh Allen arm strength. He has very good arm strength, but not like a cannon. You would think he's the all-around complete quarterback, but he doesn't have that cannon. With him not having the calf, he just can't sling it that far. He was coming up short on some things. And I saw him in that Arizona Cardinals game. When I saw him step in that pass, I'm like, that's it. Yeah. That's a touchdown. They ain't gonna touch it. So I really feel pretty good about where we're at. If they start, I think the keys to us is keeping that up tempo going, and him just taking what they're giving him, not trying to force too much, and then all of a sudden it will open up.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when we're looking at keys to success specifically for Sunday, when it comes to, we haven't even talked about our defense yet. For the defense, the defense has got to come out, and I'm not going to say necessarily shut down the Niners run game, because, it's a tough thing to shut down. There's some things that are almost impossible to shut down. And they're one of those things that it's like, all right, with the Niners, they're going to run the football. It's going to be really good. I think they're going to have to limit the run game, and they're going to have to really put a lot of pressure on Brock Purdy. Purdy's able to throw when, teams are playing umbrella coverage on the back end, if they're playing soft zone and everything. I honestly think you kind of gotta test it out real quick and see if our guys can hang with them man to man. Not necessarily, guarding a guy like George Kittle, who has been a problem for us at the tight end position, but they're receivers. Test our young corners on their young receivers and see what happens in man-to-man coverage, and try to put Brock Purdy under pressure and make him uncomfortable. That's going to be a big thing.
Yeah. Well, look what the Chiefs have done the last couple of years. They went with young guys who were inexperienced, but they could do it because they had Chris Jones. When you put a lot of pressure up front, it makes that ball come out faster, and it kind of masks some of your weakness. I'm not saying the secondary is weak, but obviously we missed Jesse Bates. Yeah. But Dax Hill is coming into his own. Cam Taylor-Britt, legit dude he's a good player, and he brings the wood, man. When he hits you, he hits you. But that's kind of our unproven piece. And if Sam Hubbard and them can get to Brock Purdy, it'll help mask some of that deficiency we have as these guys are growing and learning because they're so young.
Yeah, and like you said, the Chiefs have a guy in Chris Jones. We have a guy named Trey Hendrickson who has been on an absolute tear this season. 7 sacks in 6 games. Obviously, it feels as though that Trent Williams is going to probably be back for this game, which is very, very big for the Niners standpoint, because if they don't walk Trent Williams out there, I feel overly confident that Trey Hendrickson is going to get home to Brock Purdy a couple of times this game. But obviously, we're going to have to keep an eye on that throughout the week. The Bengals defensive line, 19 sacks over the course of 6 games. They've been really, really dominant. The linebackers and Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt have played very well when it comes to trying to, in the past game, of course, the run defense is the biggest thing. It's the biggest Achilles heel on this front. They just got to, try to limit the run game and really step things up. When we're looking, like you said, the secondary, young secondary, also DJ Turner's played really well. Cheeto's got to get back up to speed. Obviously, he's getting older. The ACLs obviously played some effect into that, but like I said, the younger guys are getting reps and they've done a really good job with them, and they just got to keep developing. It's going to be a big thing going forward. But when you look at the offensive side of the ball for the Cincinnati Bengals, the big thing, obviously, every single game is going to be, we have to protect Joe Burrow. That's good. That's a given. That's one of the couple commandments that go into the Cincinnati Bengals when number 9's out there on the field. But a huge thing is this. We can take advantage of our receivers against their corners. Shavarius Ward, Lenore. They move some guys around in the slot. They have some good safeties on the back end, an older guy into Sean Gibson who's bounced around the league a little bit. Talona Hafunga, very good young player. But, the Bengals in their quick game, playing up tempo, winning their man-to-man matchups or finding their zones, and Burrow being on target and on time is going to be huge. And if that's the case and the Bengals come out playing with pace and they're efficient, then there's a good chance that Burrow could carve up this Niners secondary like he did in 2021. We went for 350 and 2 touchdowns and almost led the comeback. I know we lost, but he's done it before. Hopefully he can do it again.
Yeah, when we lost the last time, didn't we muff 2 punts?
Darius Phillips, unfortunately,
that was pretty big. Now I do expect T. Higgins with coming off the ribs, and I know people are kind of on him, and he's got a big contract year coming up. And if we can keep him, I want to keep him. I know he's had a little bit of off year. Man, he's battled some injuries, and I'll tell you what.
Yes.
You break a rib or two, it hurts to breathe. And this dude's out playing contact sport, and then he's stretching out. You're stretching out for balls. It gives you a little bit of alligator arms. I mean, and not even on purpose. Like it's just part of what it is. This bye week probably came at a very good time for us when it came to Joe and with T. Honestly, I expect T to probably have a pretty good game. Because if you're San Francisco, I'm taking away Jamar Chase as best I can. I'm gonna make somebody else beat you. And Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins are more than capable of putting up big numbers and eating you up.
I agree, and I think this is a big thing last year when we watched the Bengals play. We had I know we lost to the Browns on Monday Night Football, but I think our big turning point when we started really figuring things out was against the Saints last year, and we were doing quick game, and we were taking what the defense gave. Jamar Chase had a big game and scored the game-winning touchdown with 2 minutes to go. But there was that game, and then off the bye over the last 2 years, the Bengals have had some pretty good bye weeks overall and coming off. In 2021, we beat the Raiders. It was a tight one for a while, and then the Bengals pulled away, and they won 32-13. And then last year, we were at the Pittsburgh game. Obviously, you were under some COVID restrictions that went on. That was rough. I mean, obviously, it was a rough one. But for the Bengals, it wasn't. They won 37-30. So coming off the bye has been good to the Bengals the last 2 years. Hopefully, in this scenario, they're well rested, and the Niners are going to come into this game very, very pissed off, losing 2 in a row on the road, coming in home. But the Bengals, if you want to be a contender, if you want to prove that we're still here and that we're back and that we're trying to get back to Super Bowl like everybody predicted, like a lot of people picked us to go, you got to win this game. I think you got to win one of the next 2 games, either the Niners or Bills. But
you got 1 or 2 minimum.
You have to go 1-1 in those 2. But I mean, this one is huge when it comes to the value in the National Football League.
Do you want to know one thing I was hoping Kyle Shanahan, when I saw him in the interview afterwards, I said, please don't say we're on to Cincinnati.
Oh, gosh. We've already not
Bill
good
Belichick,
stuff.
Man. This is not Bill Belichick. But I think I said the bye's going to do us well. Unfortunately, yes, they're coming off being pissed off. I'd rather them be fat and sassy coming in to play us, but they're not. But you know what? I'd rather play the best, and they got to be considered one of the top 5, 6, 7 teams, even with that loss.
Easily.
And if we beat them, then I feel better about us, because then that tells me we're getting close to where we need to be. And if somehow we beat them and then beat the Bills, then I feel really good. But I'm with you. We got to go at least 1-1 over the next 2 games. We got 1 out of the next 2 games. We've got to win, because both those teams are legit contenders. And if you're telling me I'd rather start a streak with if I had to, the Bills, I just can't stand the 49ers.
Yeah, I mean,
just for historical purposes, I just can't stand them. But they're a great team, and Kyle Shanahan's a great coach. You know what's funny about that is the Browns had him on their staff. They had Mike McDaniels on their staff. They let him go, and look what he's doing.
Everybody. Yeah. Yep. He's had a ridiculous tree in the National Football League. But this, obviously, the Bengals, it's a huge game. It's 4:25 CBS, nationally televised, Nance and Romo on the call. Mm-hmm. Every aspect of this game. The Niners are trying to avoid a 3-game losing streak. The Bengals are trying to create a 3-game win streak. And 2 things are going to clash at once. We're excited to see what happens in it, hopefully resulting in a Bengals victory. Do you have anything before we get on out of here?
Hoo day.
That's all we got to say. Hoo day on Sunday, and we will see you guys